Okay, so I'll go ahead and get started. So just so everyone knows, today we'll be talking about public charge, the protected areas memo, and then talk about a few health and nutrition safety net programs available in Tennessee. This webinar will be 1 hour. We'll leave a few minutes at the end for a quick Q&A period. Just so you all know, I'll send out the slidings and recordings tomorrow. Also, feel free to sign up for some of our upcoming events. On May 26th, we'll be talking about how to overcome some of the language barriers seen when accessing food assistance programs. And then on June 1st, we're gonna be partnering with Sister Reach to talk about the Black maternal health crisis. So those are some things you can sign up for on our website. Okay, so just for those who are unfamiliar with the Tennessee Justice Center, we are a nonprofit public interest law firm. We use individual client representation and and also we do administrative advocacy. We also have some class action litigation to correct systemic issues in our state programs. We also do advocacy work on both the state level and the federal level to enact legislative changes. And these webinars, we partner with other organizations across the state to share information about different policies. And this is just part of our advocacy work. Yeah, so I'll hand it over to Judith to tell you more about Turk and talk a bit more about public charge and the protected areas memo.
Thank you. Again, thanks to everyone who is here and who was able to join us. My name is Judith Clerjone. I am the policy director for the Tennessee Immigrant and Refugee Rights Coalition, Turk. We have been doing work and working in Tennessee for since 2003, I believe, so for a number of years now, and we primarily work to organize the immigrant and refugee community throughout the state. And we do a lot of policy advocacy at the state level as well as local level to try and ensure that regardless of your immigration status, nationality, or where someone was born, that they are able to thrive in Tennessee. And so for the purposes of today, I will be speaking about public charge, what it is, give a quick overview of what's been happening for the past couple of years, as well as where public charge currently stands as of now. I'll also go into some of the impacts of public charge, who's impacted currently, who's not, some of the chilling effects that we've seen. And I will also speak briefly on the protected areas memo, explaining what it is, how it's been used in the past, as well as where, what it is right now, and what are the areas that are covered. All right. So if you'll go to the next slide. Thank you. Yeah, so public charge, and I'm sure folks have been hearing this term for the past number of years, especially since 2018. When there started some rumors that the Trump administration was going to change the definition of public charge. And so public charge is a rule that's been on the books for hundreds of years now. And it essentially is a test that the US government uses to determine if someone who is applying for a change of status or a green card or to enter the US is likely to become a public charge, as in a public dependent on government subsistence. So this test allows the government to be able to deny someone if they determine that they would be a public charge. And so, as I said, this has existed, I believe, since 1882 as part of the US Immigration Act of 1882. And we've gone through a number of different iterations. All right. Yeah, and so over the the most recent years, especially before the Trump administration, we were operating under the 1999 public charge field guidance. Then around 2018, we saw or heard from the Trump administration that they were trying to change the definitions of public charge to make it a lot more restrictive on who would be deemed as a public charge. And so they, in August, I believe, of 2019, the Trump administration published a rule change and essentially, again, trying to change the definition of public charge and the requirements. And so as a result of that, partners all over the country really mobilized to submit comments in response to what they were proposing to really highlight how dangerous and restrictive this would be for so many communities. And so before the rule could take effect, I believe in October, a number of lawsuits were filed and thousands of comments were submitted. And so the final rule did take effect for a few months, but thankfully, with this new administration, when the Biden administration took over, they took steps to end the public charge rule, that the Trump version of the public charge rule. And so in March 2021, the new administration took steps to end that. And so right now, under this administration, we are back under the 1999, under the original 1999 field guidance. So all of the Trump proposals are no longer in effect. So the Trump version of the public charge is no longer in effect, and we are essentially back to where we started using the 1999 field guidance. Right now, I believe a few months ago, in February, the Biden administration proposed some changes to essentially codify the 1999 field guidance. And in response to that, a number of organizations, including Turk and TJC, signed on to a public comment to, again, encourage the administration to ensure that the public charge rule is not going to continue to negatively impact our communities. All right. So as I said, back under the 1999 field guidance, and it is back under the original definition. And so what the 1999 version essentially says is that someone is or would be considered a public charge if they are primarily dependent on government subsistence. And so this means that at least half of the applicant's financial needs must be covered by the federal government. And if you'll go to the next slides. Yes, so again, this is another letter coming from USCIS highlighting that they are returning back to the 1999 version, and that a lot of the benefits that people have been worried about under the Trump administration, and if they would be included, and I'll speak more to this when speaking about the chilling effect, right? If COVID-19 vaccination, other benefits, and if they would be included. This is a letter to assure partners that they are not. Yes, so right now for the 1999 version, there are only two benefits that are considered. So primarily cash assistance, as well as if someone is institutionalized, at government expense, so long-term institutionalization at government expense. And so those are two of the benefits assessed in the 1999 public charge test. Right, next slides. So for cash assistance, so we're looking at things like TANF, general assistance like local and federal supplemental security income and things like that. And it's really important to note that this type of assistance, a lot of immigrants, especially undocumented communities, do not qualify already for these assistance. And then, as I mentioned, the other one is long-term institutionalization paid for by the government. Yes. So what are some of the impacts of public charge? And I alluded to this already, but one of the big impact is a chilling effect. And you can move to the next slide, please. So regardless of if people were actually impacted, what we have seen is a lot of fear in the immigrant community, right? That people who were using various benefits or accessing services, whether local or federal, became really afraid that their ability to apply for change in status in the future would be impacted by the current use of different resources or access of different resources. And so that's been the biggest impact, is to really try to address a lot of the misinformation and fear coming from these proposals under the Trump administration. And so we've seen reluctance to enroll in different programs, delaying seeking medical care, questions and worries around vaccination, anxiety, stress, again, fear that accessing resources that families really need will end up harming their ability to change their status in the future. And so this is really important for providers and other folks interacting with the community to understand that it, in some ways, doesn't matter if someone is not impacted or not included under the public charge rule. The chilling effect is still there, and it's really important to ask questions, make sure people know the correct information, and also that we can reassure them and address some of those fears and misinformation that so many people have. Yes, and so
Judith, you muted yourself?
Oh no, how long have I been muted? Okay. So who are the people who are subject to the public charge test? So for the most part, this test is applied when someone is applying for a visa abroad to try to enter the US, and also applicants for legal permanent residence. So also known as green card. So someone who's applying for a green card inside the US. And also really important to know, and as I mentioned earlier, that so many different immigrant groups are not subject to the public charge test. And so there is no public charge test for asylees, refugees, so thinking of like Afghan refugees and others, people seeking asylum, T visa holders, people who have US citizenship, people who are applying to renew their green cards, DACA holders, TPS, DED, and things like that, which are a lot of the very common statuses. Those folks are not subject to the public charge test. So with all of that said, I would say the key takeaway is to know that for the most part, a majority of folks are not subject to the public charge test, right? So really important as you interact with folks, as you have those conversations, to reassure folks that for the most part, a majority of immigrants are not subject to this test. And also really key is that this does not affect the benefits that you're eligible for, right? So again, this test doesn't restrict the benefits that people are already eligible for or change those requirements in any way. And also that for a wide range of government benefits do not count in the public charge test. So Medicaid, Head Start, WIC, PEBT, free and reduced cost meals, disaster relief, a number of other programs that folks often need and use do not count for public charge. And also, as I mentioned, really important to continue to reassure people that they can still access the resources that they need, right? It's really important to address the misinformation and the fears that exist in the community because of so much back and forth and all the proposals coming in the past 6 years or so. It's really important that the approach is to really reassure people that this is not, for the most part, not going to impact their ability to change or adjust their status in the future, or their ability to access different resources. And for those who could potentially be impacted, that their first step would be to make sure that they are speaking to an attorney. All right, so I'm going to shift a bit to talk about the Protected Areas Memo. And if you have more questions about public charge, we can come back to that later. So the Protected Areas Memo is essentially it is not a policy, which is really important to know. It is a memo that serves as a guideline for how ICE and CBP and others operate. And so under the past administrations, I believe it was termed sensitive locations. And with the most recent memo produced by the Biden administration, it was titled Protected Areas, which is important and highlights how at least a sense of understanding that these areas must be protected and remain free of ICE activity. So it is not a policy, and so there's no negative consequence on the books or in law if someone violates the memo, right? Because again, it is not a policy, it is not a law, it is a guideline or guidance. And so what it attempts to do is to limit enforcement in these protected areas, right? And also this specific memo says that it is non-exhaustive, so it doesn't include every type of school, health facility, disaster relief, or social service site that may be included as a protected area. And so it gives some room for other areas that may not be explicitly listed in the memo to also be considered. It also requires reporting. So when actions are required in or near a protected area, They must be fully documented. And so what exactly are the areas that are currently protected? If you'll go to the next slide. So this includes private public schools, preschools, early learning programs, medical or mental health facilities, hospitals, clinics, vaccination sites, as well as places of worship, religious study, and also places where children gather, such as playgrounds, recreation areas, bus stops, etc. So any place that the community gathers or people gather or go to for really critical resources or needs. So medical centers, places of worship, schools, etc. These are now considered protected areas where ICE should not be conducting their activities. And so this is really important because it does, we do see a shift and the sort of ability for ICE to roam and operate in a number of places. And we, especially in the previous 4 years, we saw how detrimental ICE activity was to so many of our communities and how prevalent it was. And ICE is still present, right? And separating so many members of our communities from their loved ones. And also this memo is really important because it does shift the administration's relationship to ICE and sort of what their guidance are for that organization. Various organizations various administrations release their own versions of the memo. And so this is such a political document, right, that depending on the administration, the guidance varies. And so again, throughout all of this, right, while we are really happy to see that these areas are considered to be protected, this is still not a law. It is still not a policy. It is only a memo and a guideline for ICE. And so while this is great to see, it's still not enough, right? We still would love to see a lot more to be done to curb or curtail the ability of ICE to detain and arrest so many of our communities. So I will stop there, but again, at the end, I believe there will be some time for questions. So if folks want to chat more or have questions about that, we can speak more on it.
Yeah, thank you, Judith. So this is Heaven. I'm with the Tennessee Justice Center. I'm going to talk a bit about some of the healthcare safety nets we have here in Tennessee. So the first one I want to talk about, as you all have probably heard of course, is Tenncare. So that's Tennessee's Medicaid program. And the reason I want to talk about Medicaid is because Medicaid for children provides these certain protections. So people who are generally covered by Medicaid are children, pregnant women, parents and caretakers, and then people who are disabled. So as Judith mentioned, when it comes to public charge, Medicaid is only counted in a public charge determination if it was used to pay for institutional long-term care. So that would be if someone was in a nursing home or a long-term residential facility. But outside of that, Tenncare Medicaid, in terms of the immigrants who are able to get this, I'll talk more in depth about them on this next slide, but it includes, of course, U.S. citizens, U.S. nationals, and then there's something called the qualified non-citizens, and I'll talk about what those are, but generally immigrant groups such as asylees, refugees. But Medicaid, or rather Tenncare itself, the reason it's so important for children in particular is because it provides something called EPSDT coverage. So that stands for early periodic screening, diagnosis, and treatment. This is a set of federal guidelines that every Medicaid program in the country must follow, basically saying that Medicaid must cover certain things for children that include things like well-child visits, prescriptions, diagnostic tests, and if problems are found or it's seen that they're not developing, typically their developmental delay, then any treatments must also be covered by Medicaid. And that's a really big deal. And that's why Medicaid is so important, especially for children. But also, Medicaid is, of course, a safety net. And it's for those who generally have lower incomes, and it provides them the ability to access free or low cost health care. So, additionally, Medicaid has been shown to have some long-term impacts, not only on health, but also on other socioeconomic factors. So that includes things like fewer hospitalizations and ER visits in adulthood, fewer chronic conditions. Also, people who had Medicaid as a child, they've been shown to have higher high school graduation rates and college enrollment. So Medicaid is a great safety net, and it has been shown to have a really good benefit, has been shown to have a huge impact on individuals who have it. So let's see. So in terms of which immigrants qualify and which don't, these on this slide, this information pertains to both Tenncare and Covered Kids. So Tenncare is Medicaid, and Covered Kids is Tennessee's Children's Health Insurance Program. And Covered Kids is an option for those who have slightly higher incomes, and it will cover children and pregnant women. So when it comes to citizenship status and immigration status for who qualifies for both programs, generally there are a few exceptions that I'll talk about, but generally you must again be US citizen, US national, or fall into this qualified non-citizen group. In the qualified non-citizen group, it includes groups such as asylees, refugees, victims of trafficking, and their immediate family, and a few other things. And for those that I just named, they're subject to this 7-year eligibility period. So they're able to stay on Medicaid generally for 7 years as long as they have that status. But after the 7-year period, they either they have to be in another, I guess, citizenship group or immigration group to continue that coverage. And that could include if they become a lawful permanent resident within that time period. Um, Something to note, a few other qualified non-citizen categories are the lawful permanent residents. So the green card holders, battered immigrants and children. So, but for both of those, they're subject to a 5-year bar, basically saying that until they've had that status for 5 years, they aren't able to access Tenncare Covered Kids. So, however, the exception is made of someone who is a qualified non-citizen in one of the categories that isn't subject to the 5-year bar. If they become a green card holder, they don't have to, they aren't subject to the 5-year bar. They would still be able to keep the coverage without a 5-year bar. So if they transition from one of the other qualified non-citizen categories, that 5-year bar won't pertain to them. In terms of exceptions to being a US citizen, US national, or qualified non-citizen, they include for Covered Kids for pregnant women, you don't have to be a US citizen, qualified non-citizen. You can be undocumented and get Covered Kids as a pregnant woman here in Tennessee. And that is a big deal. We work with a lot of clients who are able to get health insurance for their pregnancy through that category. Another exception is emergency medical services. This isn't technically Medicaid, but it is pretty much emergency medical services. It's kind of Medicaid funds will be used to cover a life-saving procedure for someone who meets generally all the Medicaid criteria. However, the only criteria they don't meet is the citizenship one. So for example, if someone's undocumented, but they're income eligible, they live in Tennessee, they would be eligible for Tenncare. However, and if they're a child particularly, they would be eligible for Tenncare. However, they aren't eligible because of their immigration status. But if they needed a life-saving procedure, emergency medical services may be able to cover that procedure. And EMS is what they call it. Generally, hospitals will help individuals apply for it, but individuals can also apply for that using the Tenncare application online. Let's see. The other exception is for Iraqi and Afghan individuals who are granted special immigration status. They are generally treated like qualified non-citizens, even though I guess terminology wise that they're not in that category, but in terms of Medicaid purposes, they are treated like a qualified non-citizen. So the next healthcare safety net I want to talk about just briefly, because it covers a wider range of immigrants, is the federal marketplace. So this is through the Affordable Care Act and healthcare.gov. These plans were individuals who have generally higher incomes where they may not qualify for Tenncare or able to, or if their job doesn't offer affordable coverage, then they may be able to find affordable plan on the federal marketplace. And if they get coverage on the marketplace, they may be able to take advantage of premium tax credits and cost sharing reductions to reduce not only the amount they pay in premiums, but also their co-pays and deductibles and out-of-pocket maximums. So the marketplace can be a great resource for those who have higher incomes, but still either don't have employer coverage or their employer coverage isn't affordable. So for the marketplace, in terms of immigration statuses that may qualify it, again, US citizens, US nationals, and then all of the qualified non-citizen categories that we talked about. Something to note is that generally for the marketplace, your income has to be over 100% of the federal poverty line. However, the exception is made for those qualified non-citizens who are subject to the 5-year bar. So that includes lawful permanent residents or green card holders. They're able to get marketplace coverage and take advantage of those premium tax credits while they're in the 5-year bar, even if their income is under 100% of the federal poverty line. That is an exception made. That's something I want to make sure I note it. And then the other immigrant category for the marketplace, they define it as lawfully present non-citizens. So that's individuals who have things like a worker visa, student visa, other types of visas, those who are granted temporary protected status, deferred enforced departure, deferred action status. Exception to note for the deferred action status, that doesn't include DACA recipients, so deferred action for childhood arrivals with anyone has the status. They won't qualify for coverage on the marketplace, fitting in the lawfully present non-citizen category. And then also the marketplace will allow some immigrants who are applying for certain statuses to get coverage on it. So that would be applicants for asylum, for special immigrant juvenile status. Also, the marketplace will allow some individuals who have work authorization to qualify for coverage, such as applicants for TPS, so temporary protected services, temporary protected status, the registry, order of supervision, those who are legalized under ARCA, so Immigrant Reform and Control Act or the Life Act, the Legal Immigration Family Equity Act. So those are all the, not all of them, but kind of like a summarization of the different immigrant categories, the different immigrant statuses that may qualify for coverage on the marketplace. It's a lot more than those who will qualify under Tenncare or Cover Kids. And then lastly, I just want to go through a few other notable healthcare options, kind of different safety net programs, particularly two for children. The first is Children's Special Services, which is through Tenn, and it provides coverage for comprehensive medical care and other non-medical resources for children, generally children who have special healthcare needs. So maybe they have physical or mental disabilities. And as for those who are from birth to 21 years old, CSS has income limits, so it is restricted to those who have lower income, but there are no citizenship requirements and there aren't any particular health requirements either. So even though it says children with special healthcare needs, it doesn't restrict it to children who have certain diagnoses or children who have a diagnosis. It's really open. And generally we encourage people, if their child seems to have some social healthcare needs or they have a feeling that the child needs certain services, but they aren't able to afford to the child to go to the doctor and get a proper diagnosis, then Children's Special Services is a great resource for them in terms of helping them get the help they need. And if the child is diagnosed, then making sure they are able to afford the treatments available. Another thing is Tennessee Early Intervention System, also known as TIS. TIS is for children under 3, generally children with developmental delays and disabilities. And TIS will offer this care coordination to help them afford therapy. So if the child already has other insurance, TIS is still a great option in ensuring that in determining what the insurance will pay and what TIS can help pay for. That could be things like occupational therapy, physical therapy, speech, things like that. Older children the reason it's for children under 3 is because when children are enrolled in school, the school is supposed to provide, I guess, TIS-like services. So access to therapies and things like that would be provided through the school district. For TIS, there aren't any income limits or citizenship requirements. So as long as the child has these developmental delays, they may be able to qualify for TIS and get help, not only paying for the therapies, but also with care coordination and figuring out which who is going to be billed for the different things. And for CSS, so Children's Special Services, is generally free since they'll pay for the procedures that a child needs, or they'll reimburse the family. However, for TIS, for children who are uninsured, they usually charge a low cost for care coordination and providing access to the services. And then the last, I actually want 2 last things I want to mention. Of course, free and low cost clinics and health centers are available all across the state to help people on a sliding scale get access to healthcare. The other thing is local county health departments do provide family planning services. So that would be things like contraceptives or checkups, STD, STI testing to anyone, regardless of immigration status, regardless of income level, things like that. And they can't turn anyone away because of inability to pay. And they have a really big focus on confidentiality. So that's a great option for individuals looking to get family planning services, is the local county health departments. So yeah, those are all the health safety nets I wanted to go through. So I'll hand it over to Anna to talk about a few of the nutrition safety nets.
Thanks, Evan. Like she said, my name is Anna, and I'm from our nutrition team here at the Tennessee Justice Center. And I'm just going to kind of mimic Heaven's layout here and go through some of the key nutrition safety net programs that Tennessee has to offer and how they did and currently do and did in the past intersect with public charge, and also kind of go briefly through eligibility for immigrants and non-citizens. And so we'll start, Heaven, you can go to the next slide. We'll start with SNAP, which is kind of one of our biggest nutrition programs that we have, formerly known as food stamps. But this was, as Judith already explained for us, this was under the Trump administration's public charge policy, a program that was affected or did apply for public charge, but this no longer applies anymore. And so who is eligible? Of course, this all of the programs that I'm going to go through today very broadly and kind of first and foremost are based on income eligibility. And so SNAP, the general income limits for most households are going to be at about 130% of the federal poverty line, which is kind of hard to translate to what that looks into a monthly amount in your head, but I've linked the income requirements on this slide. So you can look at it, later. But for example, like for a household of one, it's just a little bit over $1,000 a month would be the income limits. And so then in addition to kind of the financial pieces to eligibility, for SNAP, there are some restrictions on immigration and citizenship status. US citizens can receive SNAP benefits if they're otherwise eligible. And then there are other groups of people in the US that are not US citizens who can receive SNAP. And it looks very similarly actually to Tenncare or Medicaid. And so you have folks with LPR or a green card for 5 or more years. So it has the same 5-year bar that Tenncare has, unfortunately. But the exception here with SNAP is that children, so anyone under the age of 18 who has LPR, they don't have to have the 5-year waiting period. So, the first day that they get their social, they can go and apply for SNAP. And so kind of the way that this shakes out, kind of in a real life SNAP case would be if you have maybe parents who are not quite yet SNAP immigration eligible for SNAP, but their children are, they can apply on behalf of their children. And their children can receive SNAP benefits. They will have to use the income of the entire household, so it definitely makes it more difficult for those households to be eligible for. But we work cases often where that's the case, and the children can get the benefits. Just like with Tenncare, asylees and refugees can be eligible, and they will have no waiting period. Cuban and Haitian entrants, and then there are a couple other more niche groups that aren't on this slide that would also be included in the eligibility requirements. Anyone with a US military connection can also be able to receive SNAP. And so, but in general, these are kind of these are the main groups. And the way I normally think about it when you're working with families or you're doing casework is, generally speaking, and of course there's always exceptions, but if someone has a social security number, they're probably going to be eligible. You also want to make sure that you're thinking about that 5-year bar, but in general, that's kind of the best way to approach it. Next slide. WIC is another nutrition program that we have here in Tennessee. It's another federal nutrition program, so it's in every state. But it's similar to SNAP, but it is the supplemental nutrition program for women, infants, and children. And so it's a little bit more specialized in the participants that are able to access it, just in terms of you have to be a pregnant or postpartum breastfeeding woman, an infant, or a child in order to receive benefits. But it is a program where you get an EBT card and you get a cash benefit on that card each month. In addition to the cash benefit, WIC also offers additional services. So these would be like nutrition classes, breastfeeding support, breastfeeding classes. They can do social service and healthcare referrals. And so those things can be really, really beneficial for the participants as well. But definitely the cash benefit is a big part of it. And so public charge does not currently apply to WIC. It did not apply in the past. And WIC clinics do not store immigration or citizenship data because it's not a part of the eligibility process for the program. So you don't need a social security number. You don't need to prove any kind of immigration or citizenship requirement to be in the WIC program. You just need to be a Tennessee resident. And so that doesn't even mean that you have to show a state ID. You just need a piece of mail that has your name and your Tennessee address on it in order to participate in WIC in Tennessee, as long as you meet the other requirements. And so I already mentioned about how you have to be a pregnant woman or nursing mother or a child or an infant up to age 5. But there's also an income requirement with WIC, and it's a little bit higher than the SNAP income requirement. So the SNAP income requirements are 130% or less than the federal poverty line, and WIC is bumped up to 185%. So there's a pretty good chunk of people who are able to qualify for WIC, but they can't for SNAP just based on their income. And WIC is a much more underutilized in Tennessee than SNAP is. So this is a program that we try to do a lot of outreach on and connect people with, because there are a lot of subsects of the population who can access WIC that won't be able to get SNAP. And the last piece of eligibility for WIC is that you have to be deemed at nutritional risk. And that sounds a bit intimidating, but essentially the way that the WIC clinics can kind of explain it is that everyone can be deemed at nutritional risk. They kind of look at it as like, oh, if you're not getting, your exact amount of fruit and vegetable servings every single day, then you're at a nutritional risk. So it can be all kinds of different things. So that's not a hard box of eligibility for participants to check off. So really the first three are what you're thinking about. Next slide. And then the last couple of programs that I wanted to go over here are ones that are specific for children. So Pandemic EBT, which was, as it sounds, a new program that came about during the pandemic, and then free school meals. And so public charge does not currently apply, did not previously apply to these programs, either of these. And so I'll start with the National School Lunch Program, which is the biggest school meal program. There's lots of different before and after school meals programs, but the NSLP is really what we're thinking about when we're talking about like free and reduced lunches at schools. And so this is the federal program that's providing or that's subsidizing schools to provide free or reduced lunches to kids who are eligible at all public and some private schools as well. But really this program is just looking at, do you attend the school and do you meet the income requirements? And the income requirements for this, for free lunch, it's 130% or less than the federal poverty line. For your household, and for reduced lunch, it's 185%, I believe. And so students will apply at the beginning of the year. Typically the schools pass out those applications and send home packets. And then once the application goes to the school and they're approved, and then they'll be able to get those free or reduced lunches at their school. And the other cool thing about the National School Lunch Program is that if a family is already enrolled in SNAP, Families First, which is Tennessee's TANF program, or Medicaid, then they should be automatically, or they will be automatically enrolled to free and reduced lunches. And then the last program I'll talk really briefly about is Pandemic EBT, which is a temporary, potentially temporary program that came about during the pandemic to replace the meals essentially that kids were missing when they were missing school because of COVID-19. And this is for children who would be receiving meals through the National School Lunch Program. So the Pandemic EBT program is directly linked to the National School Lunch Program. And we've had this since March of 2020. So it kind of goes on a per day basis at this point. So each day that a child misses school because of COVID-19, misses their free or reduced lunch, then they'll get a corresponding benefit onto their Pandemic EBT card. There's no application for this program. The school districts and the Department of Human Services work to automatically identify which kids are eligible. Of course, there are going to be mistakes made. There's an appeals process or reconsiderations process, and we've done a lot of work in that space, but by and large, they shouldn't have to do anything in order to receive these benefits as long as they're already enrolled in the National School Lunch Program. And benefits for this school year are just now about to start going out at the end of this month. And then we'll have it for the summer as well. So each rendition has kind of been, each school year has had its own rendition, and then each summer has had its own rendition as well. And just to kind of give you a ballpark of what those benefits look like in terms of their monetary value, for each of the summers, each child got $375 of food benefits onto their PEBT card for the summer. And so we'll have that again this summer, and potentially we'll have it again next summer. There's been some movement to try to make it a permanent program, which we are like totally in support of, but that's been stalled a little bit. So I see we're at time for questions, so I'll be quiet, but if y'all have any questions about any of these programs, more than happy to answer them.
Yeah, thank you, Anna. Does anyone have any questions? Well, if no one has any questions, we can close out. Just a reminder, we will send out the slides and recording tomorrow. And please sign up for some of our other upcoming webinars on May 26th and on June 1st. But thank you, Anna and Judith. This was great. Bye,
Thank
everyone.
you.